Proverbs chapter 1, verse 8 says this: My son, hear the instruction of thy father, and forsake not the law of thy mother. And the title of this super short sermon is In Defense of Homeschooling. In Defense of Homeschooling. I'm going to explain why homeschooling is awesome. And if you're a mom and you're homeschooling your kid and you're on it, I offer you a firm congratulations. This is something that you should be proud of. When someone asks you what your career is, you shouldn't have to feel shame of, oh, well, I homeschool. No, you should be able to proudly say, yeah, I homeschool, because you're doing your kid an awesome service, provided that you're doing it right. And I offer my congratulations for that. Now, I've heard 5 common arguments for why homeschooling is bad, and I'm going to explain why each of them is false in this sermon. Here are the 5 arguments you'll typically hear. Number 1, the homeschooled kid won't learn as well as a public school kid. Number 2, how are you going to socialize the kid? Number 3, if you homeschool them, they won't learn math and science that well. Number 4, what if the kid's getting abused by their parents or relatives? And number 5, the ideals taught in homeschooling are not mainstream. Now, the reason why I'm even bringing this up is because apparently I read in the news that Harvard is hosting some kind of anti-homeschooling symposium where they're getting all the talking heads together to basically bash homeschooling. And if you are a homeschooling mom and you happen to come across these arguments, I want to show you how to defeat them. Not only that, but if you're a mom who's never considered homeschooling before, I want to give you some reasons to get you off the fence and hopefully pull you over to the pro-homeschooling side of things. So let's get started. The first reason that they typically offer up is that the kid won't learn as well if he's homeschooled versus going to school. Now, having worked in multiple school districts, I can tell you that that one is a flat out lie. But let's start out from the Bible. The Bible says, my son, hear the instruction of thy father, and forsake not the law of thy mother. Who is primarily responsible for how a child turns out? What it says there, the father and the mother. The Bible says, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. It doesn't say children obey someone else's parents. That's not in there. So this idea that the child is morally accountable to the teacher is a myth. It's a fiction. It's false. Because in God's program, children are responsible to their parents. And this whole idea of, well, someone else can raise your kids better than you can, here is the problem with that. It allows the parent to remove accountability, remove responsibility from the situation. For example, if I am a parent that doesn't homeschool, I just let my kid go to the school system, and I don't take the time to sculpt my kid morally, I don't take the time to inform my kid, then if they go to school and they get around their friends or they get around their peers and they learn some negative influences, or if a teacher is mean to them and it somehow turns them more negative than they should be, then I can just wash my hands of it and say, well, the teacher didn't do his part. Well, the friends didn't do their part, rather than acknowledging that I'm the one that's responsible. You have a lot of parents who want to wash their hands of the responsibility of their children, and that's why they're against homeschooling, because when you as a homeschooling parent are taking the responsibility of your children, it makes them ashamed because they're not doing the same thing. So what they want to do is try to flip it around and say that you're the weird one. But it goes further than this. If you observe how a lot of teachers are evaluated for their performance evaluations, in multiple districts in this country, the students' pass rate, or the pass rate of the class, how many students pass the class, is actually directly tied to the teacher's performance evaluation. And a lot of times, the teacher's performance evaluation is tied to whether or not they keep their job. So what you see is that teachers have a strong motivation to give failing students passing grades that they haven't earned because they're afraid to be fired if too many kids fail. So in that case, it's no longer about making sure that the kid has a quality education. It becomes more about making sure that the district looks good by having a high pass rate. And then a lot of times, certain school districts will talk out of both sides of their mouth. They'll on one hand say, you got to customize the educational experience for every kid. Make sure every kid is special. Make sure every kid can get it. Appeal to every kid's learning style. But then at the other side of their mouth, they'll say, we got to get these standardized test scores up. Everything's for the standardized test. We're going to have our academic goals and the way we write our lesson plans geared towards the standardized test. When you're teaching to a standardized test, You are no longer ensuring that each student has the correct depth of information because you have to hurry up and get through your curriculum pacing guide quickly without being able to stop and really go into detail and really make sure students understand things. And I believe where this is the most apparent is in history class, because a lot of times you'll see that they can't really get into details and talk about why certain things in history happened or why this event occurred, because you just have to cover the bullet pointed, bolded terms to get through the curriculum pacing guide. And so you have kids going out in this world with an incomplete understanding of history, and they swear they know everything, and they really don't. And that's a problem. It disadvantages the next generation. So this whole idea that, oh, well, they'll learn better in the school system, not necessarily. When you're teaching to a standardized test, that goes out the window. Not only that, but when you have overcrowded classroom sizes and limited resources, whereas when a parent is the teacher and they're homeschooling their kid, what you see is that that student gets a lot of individualized attention. They can get a lot more of a depth of knowledge there because they're not just being looked over and rushed over to get to the next student before the bell rings. Now, number two, the second reason that I see a lot of anti-homeschoolers offer up is that, oh, the student won't be socialized as well. How are you going to socialize the student? How are they going to learn how they should behave around their peers? Look what the Bible says in Exodus chapter 23. Look what it says in verse 2. Thou shalt not follow a multitude to do evil, neither shalt thou speak in a cause to decline after many, to wrest judgment. I want to emphasize the first part of that verse. Thou shalt not follow a multitude to do evil. That's the Bible preaching against peer pressure, folks. Peer pressure was a thing back in the book of Exodus. Remember when Aaron was pressured by his peers to make those molten calves that were offensive against God? Just because something is popular, just because your friends are doing it, doesn't mean you should do it. Even if you look in logical argumentation, it's called the ad populum fallacy. This idea that just because something is so popular doesn't mean that it's right. The Bible teaches that. Don't follow the multitude to do evil. In other words, name one high school student. Actually, I'm going to zoom out. Look at high school students as a whole. If you go in the average high school class, especially in the inner city, is that behavior really worth imitating? Do you really want your kids acting like that? Ask every teacher, that, especially ones that work in the large inner cities, ask them, would you want your own child, not their students, their own personal children, would you want your child to act the way these kids act? And I guarantee you that most of them will say no. You see, just because a kid is getting socialized doesn't mean he's getting socialized correctly. There are all sorts of negative things that can happen in the locker room, happen under the stairwell in the school situation. Again, since I'm preaching and I know that there may be young people listening to this, I'm trying to keep it clean, but there's a lot of dirt that happens in the hidden crevices of a school system, or in the hidden crevices of that school building after school, where the parents would be shocked if they saw what kind of behavior their kids were into. So that behavior is not necessarily worth imitating. So you're not really missing much there. There are other ways to be socialized. Church, sports organizations, community organizations, going out in public. Hopefully, once this social distancing thing is over with, there'll be all sorts of ways to socialize. You don't have to get it from a school system. The third reason that they like to offer up is that if you homeschool your kids, they won't learn math and science. Now, here's the thing. We have to be careful about what we call science, because the Bible is not an anti-science book. But you know what the Bible is against? Fake science. Fake science where it pretends to be a correct body of knowledge, but in reality it is a lie. Let's look at an example here. Look in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 20. Look what the Bible says there. O Timothy, keep that which is committed to thy trust. Avoiding profane and vain babblings and oppositions of science falsely so called. What do you think that science falsely so called is? The stuff they demand your kid believe in. Big Bang, evolution, things like that, where they basically try to replace God with some mysterious explosion that came from nowhere. They try to replace God's wisdom and intelligence with a randomized process that just happens to create species that can reproduce. It's ridiculous. So here's the thing. When they say science, they're not talking about torque, gear ratios, and collision physics and electromagnetism, things that are actual science. They're talking about these kids won't be indoctrinated into Charles Darwin's philosophy. And here's the thing, we shouldn't be indoctrinated into Charles Darwin's philosophy because it's wrong, because it makes no sense. And I have a video you can check out called Conquering Mount Evolution, where I explain why evolution's wrong. But you see, here's the thing. The Bible doesn't say it doesn't say oppositions of science. It just says science falsely so called. You see, the people in the Bible use science all the time. They had to understand physics and engineering to be able to build the tabernacle, to be able to build the temple, to be able to build all the things which they built. Even you look at, I believe it was Hezekiah. It was either Hezekiah or Uzziah in the Bible who made engines, who made advanced techniques for warfare. So you had scientists in the Bible. If you read the book of Ecclesiastes, you find out that King Solomon studied every field of study there is. He studied psychology, he studied botany, he studied biology. Solomon studied it all. So the men that wrote the Bible were not a bunch of goat-herding ignoramuses who were just making stuff up as they went along. These were intelligent, wise men. And so if we're following after that example, we would be intelligent and wise ourselves. Now, when it comes to math and science, if you're not that great in math or you're not that great in science because you went to a school system that didn't teach you as well as you should have, simple, go to the library, get some books, or find an online tutorial that will help you learn those things. This whole idea that math and science are just this specialized niche that only the scientist comprehends, only the elite understand, the higher intellectual, that's antiquated. We are in an age of information. You can go to a library, read enough books for free that'll give you enough knowledge that if you're a commoner, you can compete with a college professor in terms of knowledge. You can go hold your own in a conversation with a PhD if you go to the library and read enough books. But what you need is the ambition to learn. That's one thing students are not being taught in school, is why they should learn. They're just having information spoon-fed to them and they don't care. But if you actually take the time to help your student understand why they should learn, that hunger for knowledge will be more valuable than just spoon feeding them knowledge, because they're going to go consume it themselves and they're going to consume it in mass and become even smarter than the person that had to be spoon fed. That's another thing to consider. Now, the fourth point I'd like to bring up, this is quite a serious one, and this is on the subject of kids being abused, because the fourth argument that anti-homeschoolers bring up is, well, if you homeschool the kid, how can the state make sure you're not abusing your child? My main response to that, let's look at the book of Job here, chapter 39, verses 13 through 15. Gavest thou the goodly wings unto the peacocks, or wings and feathers unto the ostrich, which layeth her eggs in the earth, and warmeth them in dust, and forgetteth that the foot may crush them, or that the wild beast may break them. So it talks about the ostrich, and it says that when the ostrich lays her eggs, she just forgets about them, and some of them get crushed. This is a metaphor that is describing what it's like to be a neglectful parent. This metaphor is repeated in Lamentations chapter 4, verse 3, where the Bible says, let me actually turn there. In Lamentations chapter 4, verse 3, the Bible says, even the sea monsters draw out the breast. They give suck to their young ones. The daughter of my people has become cruel, like the ostriches in the wilderness. So notice how the sea monster, it's talking about whales, right? Because it says it draw out the breast. There's only one kind of animal in the sea that draws out, that breastfeeds its young. That's sea mammals, like porpoises and pinnipeds and cetaceans, those kinds of marine mammals. That's what it's talking about when it says a sea monster. It's talking about marine mammals. It says, even the sea monsters draw out the breast. They give suck to their young ones. The daughter of my people has become cruel, like the ostriches in the wilderness. When it says the daughter of my people has become cruel there, it's talking about society degrading, society rejecting God and becoming more and more evil. And that's why the young ones are being treated more like the ostrich rather than like the sea monster. Because the Bible's basically saying the sea monster is like a good mom. She actually makes sure that her kids have what they need and nourished them. Whereas the ostrich is the neglectful or the abusive mom that just doesn't care what's going on. As society becomes cruel, like I said, the daughter of my people has become cruel, that's what causes abuse. Abuse is caused by overall societal degradation, by society rejecting God as a whole, not by homeschooling. Because you have kids who go to public school who are still getting abused by their parents at home. You have teachers who get fired for abusing children, and that's in the public school itself. You have kids who go to public school and get abused by their peers in the locker room, get abused by their peers after school on the way home. So the notion that somehow going to public school prevents abuse is a fallacy. Abuse happens because of the problems in society. Society is becoming cruel. It has nothing to do with whether or not a parent is homeschooling their children. So if you want to cut down on abuse in society, address the cruelty problem. Address the problem that our society is being taught that a baby in his mother's womb is not a human being, and it just doesn't matter. Address the problem in our society where young girls are being taught that marriage equals slavery and that they should just sleep with whomever they want and that you shouldn't care about it because, you don't want them to shame you. Address the problem that young men are taught not to be responsible and bold and take care of their wives. They're being taught to be less masculine and basically hide behind a woman rather than stand in front of her and protect her. Those are the problems that are leading to this. It has nothing to do with homeschooling. Now, the fourth and final argument that they bring up is that if kids are homeschooled, they're going to learn ideals that are not mainstream. And that's a good thing, because why would you want to learn that there's no God? Why would you want to be taught that the world created itself? Why would you want to be taught that marriage is between any two things? It doesn't matter if it's two men, two women, or a man and an animal. Why would you want to be taught that junk? Why wouldn't you want to be taught the right way? It's good that those views are not mainstream. And newsflash, a lot of the views that are taught in public school today were considered fringe a couple decades ago. It's just that a lot of school boards are being shifted leftward in terms of their policy and what they believe in. But look what the Bible says. This is the last verse I'm going to read, and I'm going to bring this sermon to a close. In Ephesians chapter 4, verse 14, it says, that we henceforth be no more children, tossed to and fro, and carried about with every wind of doctrine by the sleight of men and cunning craftiness, whereby they lie in wait to deceive. The devil's out there waiting to deceive your children. It's your responsibility, mom and dad, not to let him. I hope you take that seriously. God bless you.